to episode 13 of Fixing America with J. Mel. This episode is entitled, Has the Physical Takeover of Our Democracy Begun? In the last episode on popular sovereignty, we discussed how the rule of law and constitutional limits determine when the people in a sovereign nation hold power. We discussed how Trump and his administration have challenged our popular sovereignty by flaunting our Constitution and rule of law through their executive orders, challenging birthright citizenship and dictating anti-DEI policies. In this episode, we will explore other ways the administration is abusing the rule of law and violating constitutional limits to steal our sovereignty. The next thing we will discuss speaks directly to sovereignty. He who holds power is the sovereign. I'm not talking about something intangible like a concept. I'm talking about physical control, power. As citizens of this nation, we have held power, a collective power to redirect our own destiny. To stop things from happening, it may not have happened quickly, but when a leader breached certain standards, our system controlled him and protected our nation. A prime example is Richard Nixon. Another is the Civil War. Another is Senator Joseph McCarthy. Now, Trump was impeached twice. He was convicted of a criminal felony in a state court. He has been rebuffed scores of times by our judicial system, and a majority of citizens are against what he is doing in and to this country. So we cannot say our popular sovereignty is lost, but we can say it is in jeopardy for the reasons we discussed in the last episode and for the reasons we will discuss in this episode. The topic of this episode involves actual physical control and Trump's use of federal agents and forces against protesters, the press, and attempts to federalize troops in cities toward an ultimate goal of invoking the Insurrection Act of 1807. This is part of a plan that started in his first term in office and is spelled out in the 2025 Presidential Transition Plan. He has consistently maintained a propaganda campaign with his partner in crime, Fox News, and the other right-wing, quote, news, end quote, outlets focused on dehumanizing and criminalizing immigrants initially, and now even liberals and Democrats. He has painted immigrants as rapists, gang members, mobsters, known criminals, and mental patients who have been intentionally exported to our country because their home countries did not want them. He has said that they have poured into our country by the millions and are stealing our jobs, eating our pets, destroying our neighborhoods, infesting our bloodlines, and eroding our country. None of that is true. The truth is that most immigrants are hard-working, family-oriented people who came to this country looking for a better life. Most pay taxes and are productive citizens in their respective communities. Studies show immigrants are less prone to cause crime than the average United States citizen. Trump does not want us to know that. He promised to rid our country of these parasites and criminals by arresting the worst of them and deporting them. He did not campaign on the promise to deport undocumented people who had been in this country for decades and were prominent, tax-paying, upstanding citizens. He promised to deport the criminals, the gang members who were selling and manufacturing drugs that were destroying the fabric of our country. But that is not what he has and is doing. How do we know this? Look at the statistics. They do not support his claims. Believe what you see recorded at his ICE raids. They do not support his claims. If he had facts and figures to support his claims that he was arresting and deporting the heinous criminals, why isn't ICE advertising it? Why isn't ICE being transparent? Why are they so secretive? Why have they lied to federal judges and been reprimanded for it? Why do they illegally deny Congresspeople access to their detainment facilities? Because they do not want the truth revealed, that they are arresting U.S. citizens along with undocumented aliens who are valuable assets to this country and always have been, and know that the citizens do not want them treated like animals and deported. Trump wants to operate his immigration scheme in darkness because he knows it is a huge scam against even his own ardent followers. Using his lies and distortions, he has passed legislation funding huge sums of money for his immigration enforcement agency and has recruited thugs and indoctrinated its forces to use brutality to arrest people who might be immigrants simply because of the color of their skin or the language they speak. And he has demanded the right to do it without any due process, proper investigation, and in violation of their civil rights. The ICE agents were militarized in black uniforms with no or minimal insignia, armorized with face masks, helmets, clubs, assault rifles, and other military-type paraphernalia to make them look scary and foreboding. They use special operations-type maneuvers to enter buildings, approach groups of protesters, and attack apartments and other targets. They were trained to refuse to identify themselves and refuse to reveal where their arrestees are being taken or will be detained. They often arrest women and even young children and treat them all without respect or decency. They frequently move arrestees from one location to another to avoid writs of habeas corpus and routinely deport arrestees without any due process to foreign, notoriously brutal and inhumane prisons. But Trump was not happy with only ICE invading our communities using excessive force. He ordered the National Guard to join ICE to allegedly protect federal buildings and the ICE agents from alleged unruly protesters. That was not necessary. It was a lie. That presented problems in states where the governors of those states refused to authorize their National Guard units to follow that order. When Trump went to the states with friendly governors and got the National Guard troops deployed, their presence simply exacerbated an already chaotic situation, which pleased Trump. That was his real objective. He then attempted to use that as the basis for his own deployment of troops. He even sent United States Marines to a U.S. city to assist ICE until it was stopped. This conduct produced hundreds, if not thousands, of civilian protests and scores of lawsuits against ICE and other entities. So, you want proof of what is really happening? Many of those lawsuits have already resulted in temporary stays on Trump's ICE-capades. But tremendous damage has already occurred because the Supreme Court has ruled that a U.S. District Court's universal order is unconstitutional. Thus, Trump simply engages in the same or similar conduct that has been adjudicated unconstitutional in one federal jurisdiction in a different federal jurisdiction until a judge in that jurisdiction issues a similar cease and desist order. He is insistent on breaking the law. And that is where this discussion really begins. The First Amendment of our Constitution provides that Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech or of the press or the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for redress of grievances. The playbook for Trump's autocratic takeover of our democracy is defined in the 2025 Presidential Transition Plan and historically documented as follows. First, demonize a group of people. Trump chose immigrants, and he is now including the liberals and Democrats. Hitler used Jews. Next, seize control of an armed force. Trump is using ICE with the National Guard in the wing and in hopes of ultimately gaining control of the United States military. Hitler created his SS squad, which had an estimated 900,000 members at its peak. Next, the wannabe autocrat will create an insurrection to justify activation of his military force. He will then invoke a form of martial law and put himself in total control. Trump is attempting to use the cruelty of ICE and the presence of the uniformed National Guard to create chaos, fear, and resentment in the city sufficient to provoke violent protest. Once the protests become violent, he will claim there is an insurrection sufficient to justify his authority to invoke the Insurrection Act of 1807 as a statutory exception to the Posse Comitatus Act of 1878 that limits the president's authority to deploy U.S. military to enforce either civil law or criminal law within the United States. Now, Hitler used his brown shirts to beat, stab, and kill members of rival parties, disrupt meetings and rallies of other political parties, confiscate their literature and tear down their posters, and in general intimidate German voters using his paramilitary force prior to his appointment as chancellor. After his appointment, he used state-sanctioned violence to crush any remaining opposition, and the burning of the Reichstag building in 1933 as a pivotal moment to blame the fire on a supposed communist plot to issue an emergency decree to suspend civil liberties like freedom of the press and assembly. He followed that with the arrest of his political opponents and others who had criticized him. That was Hitler's insurrection against whom he unleashed his attack. Trump's ICE agents are already pulling people out of their homes, out of courthouses where they attempt to comply with their immigration requirements, out of employment stations where they await opportunities to work, off of streets, out of restaurants, and out of minority neighborhoods, primarily in Democratic states and cities. They have physically attacked peaceful protesters, clergy, and violently separated children from their parents and left the children stranded or forced the parents to make impossible decisions to either take their children with them, not knowing the kind of violent environment they are taking them into, or abandon them to the ICE agents. They are denied a meaningful choice by Trump and his immigration policy. Once Trump has command of the National Guard and or the United States military to execute his goals, he has already promised to expand it to not only the immigration population, but to the liberals and Democrats. He has promised to build detention facilities, which are really just concentration camps, across the country to house these groups of people he hates. This is not an idle promise, as demonstrated by the alligator Alcatraz facility he has already constructed in the swamps in Florida, which was temporarily halted. That order was subsequently blocked by an ultra-right-wing appellate court. The plethora of lawsuits against his use of federal agents and forces has been based in large part on the use of excessive force against peaceful protesters and journalists, due to its chilling effect on press coverage and protest activity, or that the administration exceeded its authority in sending the National Guard units into state and local jurisdictions. The lawsuits allege violations of the First Amendment for retaliation and suppression of speech, and violations of the Fourth Amendment for unreasonable search and seizure and exceeding executive use of federal power. It is hard to overemphasize the significance of this aspect of Trump's plan to destroy our democracy and supplant it with an autocracy simply because it involves the physical, violent part of the plan. An autocrat's control of a police force or military group is used to intimidate opposition leaders and citizens into submission to the autocrat's policies and executive orders. Once he can establish fear, he can control legislatures, agencies, and the mass media. Once he can control those entities, he can control the population by screening the news they hear. The recent Israeli-Palestinian Hamas peace plan is very revealing about who our president is. He successfully negotiated a ceasefire, release of hostages, and the release of aid to Gaza. That was a wonderful thing, and he is commended for it. Neither Obama nor Biden were able to accomplish that goal. Both tried and failed. Whether it holds is yet to be seen. But we know one thing. Trump has the desire to transform the Gaza Strip into a luxury resort and make it either his or ours, which could mean it would either be his personal real estate development or a United States-sponsored real estate development in which he would own a share. We also know a major reason for doing it was to earn the Nobel Peace Prize. We know because he actively campaigned for it and has since coerced the recipient to give the medal to him. I am not ready to label his action altruistic. Trump confessed that he speaks the same language of the leaders of the countries involved in this peace plan. What language is that? The language of an absolute monarchy, in the case of Qatar, the language of an autocrat, Erdogan, in the case of Turkey, whom Trump certainly admires. Remember, he allegedly received an illegal $10 million loan during his campaign against Hillary Clinton from the head of that country. The language of an authoritarian in the case of Egypt, the language of a terrorist organization in the case of Hamas, and the language of a prime minister under criminal indictment in Israel for bribery, fraud, and breach of trust in the case of Benjamin Netanyahu. So, that is one time I agree with Trump. He does speak their language because he is one of them. We will continue our journey in the next episode. Please hit the like button, leave any comments, and subscribe. Be safe and keep on resisting.